was Helen Keller who said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Born blind, deaf, and unable to speak, she somehow found a way out of the darkness and into the world around her. Her story is one of the great miracles of the 20th century. So I ask you today to consider her words a second time. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And when you bring this observation into the spiritual realm, it sounds something like this. I'll put it on the screen. A life of faith is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. As the writer of Hebrews said, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. Our sacred scriptures are filled with men and women who lived lives of daring, faith-filled adventures. These are our ancestors. Noah built an ark where there were no prototypes. People had never experienced rain, and for over 100 years he was ridiculed, yet he dared to believe. Abraham left his comfortable home where he knew where all the good Dutch brothers were, where the cheapest gas was. Abraham left his favorite greasy spoon diner where he drank coffee, ate eggs and bacon, and hung out with his fellow nomads, and dares to believe God has a land for him somewhere he does not know, a promised land that did not show up on his Google Map app. God tells Moses to lead his fellow Jews out of Egypt to the promised land. Only one problem. Pharaoh has the most powerful army in the world, but he dares to believe God will somehow provide a way. Joshua is told to bring down the walls of Jericho, and God tells him to put his weapons down, get your trumpets out, and march around the walls. He dares to believe, and the trumpets sound, and the walls come down. David faces a giant where even the bravest soldiers were saying he's not defeatable. Not gonna do it. No one wants to. David dares to believe, and with a few smooth stones and his whammo wrist rocket slingshot, he takes down the behemoth. Elijah dares to believe that 1 on 400 is doable, and he brings down the prophets of Baal. Esther dares to believe and confronts a powerful king and risks her life to save a whole nation. Daniel refuses to defile himself with the king's food, and he dares to believe that the lions will go on a hunger strike. Let me say it again. A life of faith is a daring adventure, or it's nothing at all. For here's the truth. If you need all the answers before you step out, if you want guarantees before you make a decision, if you want God to give you a detailed play-by-play of your future before you move, then faith will always be just beyond your reach. On the other side, if you feel like you know it all and you have it all figured out and you have no doubts at all, then you don't have faith at all. That's something else. Christian theologian Paul Tillich wrote, doubt isn't the opposite of faith, it's actually an element of faith. Which brings us to our story in Matthew chapter 14. It's also found in the book of John, but we'll look at Matthew 14. It tells a story of a daring adventure, some impressive faith, some relatable doubt, an adventure that turned into an incredible miracle, but may I say, an imperfect miracle. The background of the story is Jesus is on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It is late in the day, and Jesus has just performed the great miracle of feeding thousands of people with a few loaves of bread and a few fish. Understandably amazed and enthralled by this miracle, the people want to make him king. But this isn't Jesus' mission, and he knows their enthusiasm is shallow and fickle, so he refuses and instead goes off to pray by himself. Jesus is modeling healthy self-care, rest, and prayer. So he sends his disciples back across the sea. He sends them off in a boat ahead of him, and he says, I'll catch up with you later. So far, so good. Just get yourself in this story. Good plan, Jesus. You pray, we'll go home. It's been a great day. What a miracle. They're bringing some of the 12 baskets of leftovers from the miracle home to their families. So there they are. They're on the sea in a boat loaded with leftovers. I love leftovers. Do you love leftovers? Raise your hand if you love leftovers. I love my dinner. Leftovers always become my next morning's breakfast. Pasta? Next morning, egg on top, Parmesan. Pizza? Next morning, egg on top, Parmesan. Steak? Next morning, egg on top, Parmesan. Hot and sour soup? Next morning, egg on top, Parmesan. Tacos? Well, you know, I'm not a well person. The disciples are sailing across the lake, a boat filled with leftovers, maybe nibbling on some sourdough, reminiscing about all the incredible miracles they've seen Jesus do. An enormous storm blows in. The gospel writers tell us the storm began at 8 p.m. That's important. And then it continues all night long. Now stop. We might be tempted to think, well, if we obey Jesus and get in the boat and go across the sea because he told us to, that the storms of life won't come. But here we discover that sometimes Jesus sends us into the storms. Sometimes he sends us into the storms to fight injustice. Sometimes he calls us into the storm to speak for the voiceless, to defend the defenseless. Sometimes he sends us into a storm of surrender and self-sacrifice. Jesus often sends us into the storm so that we can grow in our faith and experience a miracle. I'll say it again, a life of faith is either a daring adventure or it's nothing at all. So the disciples are in the boat struggling against the wind and rain, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight, 1, 2, 3 o'clock. This is not a story about a quick windstorm rising up, coming and going. The storm is relentless. It continues with no sign of letting up. Let me ask a question. Ever have one of those kind of storms in your life? Relentless, will it ever end? A health storm, a relational storm, a financial storm, and you're exhausted, discouraged, wondering if it will ever end? Well, after 8, 9 exhausting hours, the disciples are drenched, chilled to the bone, the bread is soggy, weary to the point where they begin to wonder if they will make it to the shore alive. And Matthew records, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Shortly before dawn. Yeah, they'd been there a while. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." But the disciples aren't sure it's Jesus, and Peter wants a little proof. "Lord, if it's you," he says, "tell me to come to you on the water." Well, that's a weird statement. As Johnny Carson used to say, that's some weird, wild, and wacky stuff. It's a strange statement. Here's maybe a better statement. "Jesus, if that's you, why don't you climb in here so we can get a better look?" Or, "Jesus, come over, show some identification." Or, Jesus, if that's you, will you calm the storm?" But no, Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to get out of the boat and walk on water." What an odd question and request. That would not have been my first option. You know, throughout the scriptures, Peter says and does a lot of curious things, but in my mind, this ranks right at the top of curious things. If I were in the boat, about ready to capsize, I'm going to say something more along the lines of, "Jesus, if you would, please do that thing where you stretch out your hands, abracadabra, and calm the waters." That's what I would have said. But walk on water? No, it's not the time. It's almost dawn, and the disciples see Jesus walking on the water, and they're terrified, and someone cries out, "It's a ghost." And we can understand this fear, can't we? Especially when you're in the middle of a storm. It's 4:30 in the morning, dead tired, muscles aching, wind howling, rain pelting our face. Things always seem scarier in the middle of the night. My first thought would not be, "Oh, Jesus has decided to take a leisurely stroll on the water in the middle of the storm, so I will not be afraid." "It's a ghost" makes more sense. But Jesus immediately says to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And so Peter just says it. "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." It's a curious request. Let me ask this question. How many miracles had Peter performed? 0. And he wants to start with walking on water in the middle of a storm. Why not start out on a sunny afternoon in the kiddie pool with your floaties on? In the deepest waters, in the middle of a storm, and he's not even sure it's Jesus. What's going on here? Well, maybe Peter is thinking, "I'm tired of seeing miracles but not being a part of them." Maybe Peter is thinking about his ancestors, knowing that a life of faith is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Maybe Peter is just trusting those words, "Don't be afraid," from Jesus. "Lord, if it's you, then let me walk on water." Friends, God will get us all to a point where we have to decide. Will I keep playing it safe in the boat, or will I step out of my comfort zone and experience a miracle? When Jesus says, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid, he uses an expression the disciples would immediately understand. That phrase, it is I, is the Greek version of God saying in Exodus, his name, I am. Jesus is saying, fear not, because I am. I am the God of the universe. I created the wind and the waves, and I sent the storm. It is the Lord of the universe who tells Peter to come to him on the water. So maybe that's why Peter wanted to come out. It's funny, because Peter's reputation, he's known as an impulsive, headstrong, foolish, fearful, Mr. Know-it-all, argumentative guy. In this story, Peter often gets a bad rap. Yep, there Peter goes again. But everything points in another direction. At this point, Peter is not being impetuous. He's not just climbing out of the boat. That would have been foolish. Scripture is very clear that Peter asks for permission first. And it is the Lord of the universe, I am, who tells Peter to come to him on the water. Jesus says, come, come. And when Jesus says to you and I come, as scary as the storms may be, as high as the waves may be, it's safe. Ironically, in Peter's case, he was safer out on the water in the storm than in the boat. The smartest thing Peter could do was get out of the boat. So Matthew records, Peter got down out of the boat. Now just stay here. We know the story further on, but he gets out of the boat, waves, everything, and he walks on water towards Jesus. Wow. I mean, think about it. Have you ever seen a man walk on water? Have you ever walked on water? I have a friend who walks on water, but the boat has to be going 40 miles an hour because he's a barefoot skier. Peter is walking on water. Let's not dismiss this. He's walking towards Jesus. This is pretty cool. This is the miracle. But it's an imperfect miracle because when he saw the wind, he was afraid and he began to sink. Peter takes his eyes off Jesus and begins to sink. The storm hasn't stopped. The wind is still howling. The rain's still coming down. The boat is still rocking. Dallas Willard defines faith as concentration on Jesus in the midst of life's storms. Simple to understand, it's hard to do sometimes, isn't it? Because it's easy to get distracted and afraid when the storms of life rage around us. When there's a bad doctor's report, when your child is making bad decisions, when finances are stealing your peace, when there's a relationship that just seems to be going south, when fear is ruling your soul, it's easy to take our eyes off Jesus when the raging storms of life threaten to drown us. Yet faith is concentration on Jesus, not when the storms go away, but in the midst of life storms. We sing these beautiful songs. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, right? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Whoa, did you hear all the bad news this week? Look full in his wonderful face. The stock market's down, the crime rate's up. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim. Global warming, holy wars, raging fires, shaking ground, inflation, stagnation. My scale is increasing, my bank is decreasing. In the light of his glory and grace. I'll just be honest, that's the way I often live life. Even for those of us who've been followers of Christ for a long time, keeping our eyes on Jesus can be difficult. Last Sunday, I was talking to a gentleman, goes to this church. He's a wonderful man of deep faith. I'm just getting to know him. He has served God in sacrificial, heroic ways, using his gifts and talents to serve the underprivileged. And his family is dealing with some health issues that seem very, very, very unfair. And he was honest. He just said, I'm struggling with God in all this. I get it. Real honest. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. By their faith. You see, this is not new. So if you feel this struggle with your faith, if you wrestle with your faith, this is not new. This is not new. We follow our ancestors who received approval from God by walking by faith and not by sight. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our ancestors stumbled and bumbled and tumbled in their lives, in doubt and confusion and failures and distractions. Our ancestors, in spite of that all, were approved by their faith. So I'll put this on the screen. I wrote this about 7 years ago when I needed to write it. God will never ask you to get out of your boat when the waters are calm, the skies are blue, and the shore clear. No, he will always ask you to step out when the waves are high, the sky violent, and the shore unknown and unseen. You and I are part of a heritage, our ancestors who stepped out when the waves were high and the sky violent and the shore unknown and unseen. And they had faith. It wasn't a perfect faith, but they had a faith. And for a brief moment, Peter walks on water, and then he sees the storm, and he takes his eyes off Jesus. He looks down at his feet and sees nothing but water underneath, and his mind comes to a quick conclusion. I'm not supposed to be walking on water. And as he goes down, he prays one of the most powerful, beautiful, shortest prayers in all the Bible. And I want us to remember this prayer because it's a powerful prayer for anyone. Just 3 words. Lord, save me. Lord, save me. The brevity of this prayer keeps him from drowning. Because when you are sinking, you don't have time to pray, oh dear God, I am having a bit of a struggle here on the water. My feet seem to be sinking. The windeth is scaringeth me. I forgotteth my floaties. The sea is deep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep me from drowning. So I beseech thee, O Lord, to have mercy on me because I'm not a very strong swimmer. I should have never gotten out of the boat. Please forgive my foolishness and help me back, and I will never ever do this again. In Jesus' name, amen. And by the end of the prayer, you're dead. By the end of the prayer, I'd be at the bottom of the sea. Jesus is standing there going, I get the point. Are you done yet? I wonder if he ever thinks that about my prayers. Too long. 3 words, friends. 3 words. Lord, save me. So I want everyone to practice this together. This is the most powerful prayer you can pray this week. Everybody say it out loud. 1, 2, 3. Lord, save me. Lord, save me. It's an easy prayer to remember, and it's a powerful prayer. And immediately, Jesus reaches out his hand and grabs Peter's hand and pulls him up. Lord, save me. What am I saying? I'm saying you gotta, as that old song goes, you gotta put your hand in the hand of the man who stilled the waters. You gotta put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the sea. Take a look at yourself, and you can look at others differently by putting your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee. Jesus reaches down, he pulls Peter up. And then he says some interesting words. He says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, in our English version, you of little faith is 4 words, but in the Greek, Jesus only used 1 word, and it means little faith. It's a nickname. Jesus calls Peter little faith. Little faith, why did you doubt? Little faith, if you just had your eyes stayed on me, you could have walked from here to Hawaii. But little faith is better than no faith. In fact, a few chapters later, Jesus says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and it shall be moved, and nothing will be impossible for you. So a little faith goes a long ways. Even a life of little faith is a daring adventure. For Peter, those first faith steps were like a toddler's first steps, a little unsure. But as time went on, and it took time, most of us know the story of Peter. Peter got better at keeping his eyes on Jesus. So let me just give 2 observations today, all right? First, before you come down too hard on Peter for taking his eyes off Jesus, just remember there were 11 other guys back in the boat watching the whole event. You know, couch potatoes, we call them 11 boat potatoes. They're just sitting in there. As long as you stay in the boat, you'll never sink, but you'll never experience a miracle. I grew up in Sunday school hearing the story, and they never talked about the other 11 boat potatoes, right? Why? Because they stayed in the boat. Today, children, we're going to learn about Bartholomew. No, we're not, because he didn't get out of the boat. Today we're going to learn about Matthias. No, because he stayed in the boat. What about Simon and Philip? No, they stayed in the boat. This is a story about Peter because he got out of the boat and walked on water, not perfectly. It's an imperfect miracle, but he walked on water. So give the man credit. He did it. They didn't. And it's like my favorite quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Before we criticize Peter for having little faith, we remember that little faith is better than no faith because Peter got in the arena, and when you do, that little faith can move mountains. The second observation is this. When Jesus called Peter little faith, he was not rebuking Peter for attempting too much, but for trusting too little. This is a great life lesson. Jesus did not rebuke Peter for getting out of the boat. Jesus is really saying, Peter, if you'd have kept your eyes on me, you could have walked across the Atlantic. Which brings me to my kind of last thought here. It's not as morbid as it's going to sound, but it's my last final argument for getting out of the boat. We're all going to die someday. We're all going to die someday. Anne Lamott, she said it, 100 years from now, all new people. No one gets off planet Earth alive. And so here's the truth. We're either going to die in the boat or out in the water. Christ calls us to find out what he is doing in the stormy world and then get out of the boat and walk towards him and his cause. To proclaim good news to the poor, to set the oppressed free, and proclaim the year of the Lord. Isaiah 58, our church is named after this chapter. If you're new here, read the chapter. It'll explain what we're trying to be. To set the oppressed free, to share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, and when you see the naked, to clothe them. I have a friend, very interesting, who has a lot of questions and doubts about God. He's got a lot of church baggage, and I understand why he's got a lot of questions and doubts. You might nickname him Little Faith. Little Faith. But his heart recently has been being pulled towards the homeless. And he's put together packets of crackers and peanut butter and jerky and bottles of water to hand to homeless people. In fact, he's using some of the peanut butter you are bringing. And you can see it. Those that are his friends can see that God is at work in his life. Is his name Little Faith? Sure. But God is using him and he's blessing others, and you can see it. And the reason is he's gotten out of the boat. Not perfectly. He's little faith, but he's no longer a boat potato, because as long as you stay a boat potato, God can't work in your life. We might be nicknamed little faith, but it's really all the faith we need. He doesn't ask us to have perfect faith. He doesn't expect us to know all the answers or try to figure it all out. Just step out, keep your eyes on Jesus, because faith is a daring adventure, because the only thing we cannot do is stay in the boat. So let me ask this question, very practical message here. What area in your life would you say, I've been in the boat long enough? What area? Maybe out of comfort or maybe out of fear. And maybe you would say today it's time I get out of the boat. I don't know what it is for you. But if you do, let me tell you what's going to happen. If you get out of the boat, you'll never need Jesus more. But you'll also experience a miracle. Maybe you're watching, or maybe you're here, you're there in the building and your heart's been pounding because you know what it means to get out of the boat for you. I'm so glad we stepped out of the boat in the middle of a fearful storm called COVID to start this church. Simple, safe, servant-focused. If we didn't, we would have missed out on the miracle of this church. I would have missed out on the miracle of knowing you. I have a friend who would tell you he's so glad he got out of the boat in the storm of addiction to walk towards Jesus to experience the miracle of sobriety. Now, he would say he was a little faith, because he sunk a few times trying to overcome, but Jesus just kept pulling him up and pulling him up. I have a friend who would tell you she's glad she got out of the boat in the storm of woundedness and walked towards Jesus to experience the miracle of healing. Matthew 14. It's a story of an imperfect miracle where Peter walked on water and sank while 11 others didn't even try. And there's a reason we don't preach about them. So let me repeat what I said earlier. God will never ask you to get out of your boat when the waters are calm, the skies are blue, and the shore clear. No, he will always ask you to step out when the waves are high, the sky violent, and the shore unknown and unseen. But that's where the miracles are. Faith is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And I just want to encourage you, whatever area in your life you need to get out of the boat, do it. Keep your eyes on Jesus, and you will see a miracle. Because the irony is this, the boat seems like the safe place to be, and getting out of the boat seems like the dangerous move, yet the boat is the dangerous place because it kills our faith. Corrie ten Boom was a Dutch Christian who was imprisoned for helping Jews escape the Nazis, and she got out of the boat to fight injustice, while many of her fellow citizens stayed safe in their boats. Corrie would say this, look at this quote, she would say, "The safest place is in the center of God's will." Corrie knew what it meant to follow Jesus into stormy, dangerous circumstances. She and her family were responsible for rescuing nearly 800 Jews through an underground network of safe houses. And God didn't take away the storm. He led Corrie right into the storms. So what does God promise us when we get out of the boat and into the storms? What does he? He doesn't promise that he'll calm the storm. He just promises his presence. He promises a love that never fails. That's all. But that's enough. For what can separate us from his love? Paul said it. Not death, not life, not angels, not principalities or powers, not height, depth, nothing. No creature, no storm or sickness, betrayal, failure, depression, pain, wounds, fear can separate us from God's love. So when Peter was out on the raging waters walking towards Jesus in the middle of the storm, he was smack dab in the middle of God's will. So friends, will you step out, get out of the boat, and put your hand in the hand of the man from Galilee, for the safest place is in the center of God's will. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. For a life of faith is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Thank you very much. God bless you. I'll see you next Sunday.